When Emily Parker first met Daniel Monroe, she was 26 and full of dreams. The chaos of New York City pulsed around her like an electric current, but in his eyes, she found a quiet she did not know she had been craving. He was charming, polished, and attentive, offering her flowers after their first date, opening doors, and listening like her words were worth more than gold. Daniel had a magnetic presence. A well-dressed architect with a soft voice and an elegant apartment in Brooklyn Heights, he seemed to come straight from a different world. Compared to Emily's modest life as a children's librarian in Queens, he appeared almost unreal. But he never made her feel small. At least, not then. Their early days together were a montage of laughter, long walks through Central Park, and late-night conversations over wine and vinyl records. Emily's friends envied her, and her mother called Daniel a perfect gentleman. Even her reserved father had to admit that Daniel seemed steady and respectful. In those first few months, love moved quickly. They took weekend trips upstate, watched Broadway shows, and shared quiet dinners at home. Daniel would often surprise her with little gestures, a no to her bag, a scarf when the air turned cold, her favorite croissants from a tiny bakery she once mentioned in passing. Every detail made her feel seen. But amidst the romance, there were cracks too small to recognize. He hated being kept waiting. Once, she was late to a dinner because of a delayed train, and he was cold all evening. When she apologized, he smiled, but with a tightness that lingered. Another time, he dismissed her idea of applying for a literacy grant with a casual, "You really think you can manage that sort of thing?" They were small things, easily brushed aside. Everyone had moods, did they not? Relationships were about compromise. And Emily believed that love was not about perfection, it was about patience. So, when Daniel suggested she move in with him after only 5 months, she said yes. Her studio flat in Queens had peeling paint and noisy neighbors. His apartment had views of the river, space for her books, and him. It felt like a step forward. But she did not know then that love, once so warm and golden, would slowly start to shift. That the man who once held her hand through crowded streets would soon make her feel utterly alone, even in their shared home. For now, though, everything still seemed perfect, and Emily still believed she had found something beautiful. At first, the changes were subtle, barely noticeable, like the slow drifting of seasons. Emily had lived with Daniel for just over a month when she started to feel something strange. The apartment, once a place of comfort, began to feel like a gallery, every object in its place, every room silent and pristine. She found herself tiptoeing more, careful not to disturb the harmony Daniel seemed to treasure. He would frown when she left dishes to dry in the sink instead of drying them immediately. He said nothing when she stacked her books on the coffee table, but later, she found them placed back on the shelf in alphabetical order. "It's just how I function," he said once, with a soft chuckle. A tidy space, a tidy mind. Soon, Daniel began asking about her whereabouts more often. Not with anger, but with a casual concern. "Where were you after work?" he would ask, his eyes searching hers. "I called, but you didn't answer." She started feeling guilty for having coffee with friends or staying late at the library. Even when she explained, he would simply nod and smile. But then came the quiet treatments, the silences, the distant looks. The air between them would turn cold without warning. One evening, after a small disagreement about a misplaced scarf, Daniel left the apartment without a word. He returned 2 hours later with flowers and dinner. "I hate when we argue," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It makes me feel like I'm losing you." Emily told herself that this was just part of adjusting to each other. Couples went through phases, and maybe she was the one being too sensitive. But then, her world began to shrink. Daniel started criticizing her clothes. "That dress is too short," he said one night before dinner with friends. "You don't want people getting the wrong idea." When she wore something more modest the next time, he complimented her with an approving nod that felt more like a command than praise. He also grew cold toward her friends. When her best friend, Marcy, invited her to a weekend book fair, Daniel said nothing at first. But later, when they were alone, he asked, "Do you really enjoy spending time with someone like that?" She doesn't seem to have grown up. Emily defended Marcy, but Daniel merely shrugged. It's just an opinion, he said. You're allowed to make better choices. She stopped going out as much after that. It was easier not to cause tension. Easier to stay home, to make dinner, to keep the peace. And yet, she kept telling herself it was not that bad. He never raised his voice. He still brought her coffee in the morning. He still said he loved her. But beneath those words, something darker had begun to stir. A quiet erosion of who she used to be. One night, while brushing her teeth, she looked at her reflection and realized she had not laughed in days. Not really laughed. Still, she convinced herself she was just tired. That this was adulthood. That all relationships went through rough patches. She had no idea how much worse it would get. It was not sudden. The isolation crept in like fog over the city, silent and steady, until Emily could no longer see the life she had once known. The first to drift away was Marcy. After several unanswered texts and a few canceled plans, she stopped trying. One evening, Emily saw a message pop up on her phone. I miss you, Em. Are you okay? She started to reply, fingers trembling over the screen, but Daniel walked into the room, and she quickly locked the phone. She never sent the message. Daniel began working from home more often. At first, it felt nice, like having a constant companion. But soon, Emily realized she was never truly alone. Whether she was brushing her hair, reading a book, or simply staring out the window, Daniel was always there, quietly observing. He did not like it when she closed doors. The bathroom, the bedroom, even the balcony. He would always open them a few minutes later, as though privacy was no longer something she was allowed. He made comments about her mother. She's too emotional, he said once, after a phone call Emily had with her. Always trying to get inside your head. After that, Emily started calling her less. Then came the day she blocked her number, saying she needed space. Her mother's last words had been, "You don't sound like yourself." Emily laughed it off with Daniel later. "Mother's right," she said. He smiled and kissed her hand. Her workplace became the only world beyond their apartment. But even that began to close in. Daniel would walk her there sometimes, waiting outside like a shadow. He claimed it was romantic. He started offering to help her with her workload. "Let me organize your calendar," he said. "You forget things. I just want to help." She let him. It was easier than arguing. Her colleagues began to notice the difference, how Emily no longer joined office lunches, how she left the moment the clock struck 5. But they said nothing. Politeness masked their concern. Emily's world became a circle of silence, tight and suffocating. Her thoughts were no longer her own. She second-guessed everything she said, every step she took, every text she typed. Her phone had become something he checked. Just to be sure. Just for peace of mind. Once, she tried to wear red lipstick to work. He looked at her for a long time before saying, "That color does not suit you. You look better natural." She wiped it off before leaving. At night, she would lie awake beside him, listening to the hum of the city outside. The sirens, the distant rumble of trains, the life she was no longer part of. And in that stillness, she began to understand something terrifying. She was alone, truly alone, even though she was never by herself. It began with words. Sharp, quiet, calculated. "You're lucky I put up with you," Daniel said one morning, as she spilled coffee on the counter. Emily froze, cloth in hand, unsure how to respond. "Honestly," he continued, not even looking at her, "most men wouldn't tolerate half the things you do." The silence that followed felt heavier than a scream. Emily laughed nervously and mumbled an apology. The next day, he refused to speak to her altogether. No good morning, no kiss on the forehead, no idle chatter about the weather. She followed him around the flat, trying to make things right, but he looked through her as if she did not exist. By the end of the day, she was begging. She cried in the kitchen while he stared at the television. "Just tell me what I did wrong," she pleaded. He turned to her finally, eyes cold. "I don't have to explain myself to you." That night, she slept on the sofa, though she never meant to. Her pillow was wet. It escalated in waves, not storms. Not at first. When she wore her favorite dress, the green one that swayed with every step, he told her she looked cheap. When she bought a candle that reminded her of her childhood home, he blew it out and said it gave him a headache. He chipped away at her slowly, like a sculptor removing every imperfection, except he was not carving beauty, he was erasing it. He monitored her spending. "You're reckless," he said, even when she spent her own salary. Soon, he asked for access to her bank account to help manage things better. She gave it to him. What followed was humiliation masked as care. He told her she was putting on weight, that she should try harder if she wanted to keep him interested. At dinner, he watched every bite she took. Once, when she reached for a second helping, he whispered, "Are you sure you want that?" At work, she started to make mistakes. Missed deadlines. Forgotten meetings. Her boss called her in one afternoon and asked if everything was all right. Emily nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears, and said she had not been sleeping well. "You used to be the most organized person here," her boss said gently. "Is something going on at home?" Emily shook her head. "Just tired," she whispered. The breaking was not loud. It did not happen all at once. It came in sighs and tears behind locked doors. In the way her hands shook when she tried to apply makeup. In how she avoided mirrors. He told her no one else would want her. That she was damaged. That he was the only one who truly understood her. And part of her began to believe it. She stopped calling herself Emily. She was his. Winter had wrapped the city in a gray hush, and with it came the final severing of Emily's ties to the world. Daniel's manipulation had grown into control so quietly, so expertly, that she no longer recognized it as unnatural. One evening, her phone buzzed with a message from her sister in Boston. "Miss you. Call me when you can?" Emily read it twice before quietly deleting it. Daniel had seen the name flash on the screen and asked, "Still chatting to people who never really cared?" She hesitated, then replied, "She just wanted to check in." He scoffed. "She only messages when it suits her. You deserve better." That night, she blocked the number. One by one, the people in her life faded. Old friends who invited her out for coffee stopped calling. Her mother's emails went unanswered. Every missed birthday, every excuse made on Daniel's behalf, pushed her further into his shadow. "I'm all you need," he whispered one night, holding her too tightly. "The rest of them never understood you anyway." Emily nodded because it was easier than arguing. She was tired. Always tired. It was not just physical exhaustion, it was the weight of being unseen, of shrinking a little more each day to make room for his presence. He began to control how she dressed. No skirts. No bright colors. "You're not a child," he would say, tugging at a sleeve or criticizing the way a blouse clung to her waist. When she cut her hair short, hoping for a small change, he was furious. "Did you even think about what I like?" She hadn't. She had thought only about what might make her feel new again. But nothing made her feel new. Or real. He insisted on driving her to work. He picked her up, always arriving unannounced to ensure she was where she said she would be. She stopped going out for lunch with colleagues. She stopped going anywhere at all. Her world shrank to the size of a two-bedroom flat in Queens. A gilded cage, painted with soft blues and grays. She had once decorated it with candles, flowers, books stacked in corners. But over time, the candles burned out and were never replaced. The flowers wilted. The books collected dust. When the power went out during a storm, Emily sat in the dark and did not move. She did not call the power company. She did not light a match. She simply sat, wrapped in a blanket, watching the shadows. It was in that silence that she realized how loud he had become inside her mind. Even when he was not in the room, his voice was there. "You're useless. No one wants you. You'll be nothing without me." And maybe he was right, because the person who once filled a room with laughter and stories now barely made a sound. It was a rainy Friday evening when the final thread of Emily's strength began to fray. She had just returned home from work, her coat soaked through and her hands trembling from the cold. The moment she stepped inside, Daniel was already pacing. "Why didn't you answer my call?" he demanded. "I was on the train," she replied quietly, slipping off her wet shoes. I called you 3 times, Emily. She tried to explain again, but he grabbed her wrist. Not tightly, not enough to bruise, but enough to silence her. His eyes were calm in the way storms can sometimes be just before they break. You're not listening anymore. I don't know who you think you are. Something in her snapped. It was not rage, nor defiance. It was quieter than that. Quieter and far more dangerous. I don't know who I am either, she said. He let go of her wrist and walked away, muttering about disrespect, about loyalty, about how much he had done for her. She stood still for several minutes. Her socks were wet, and the heating was broken again. She stared at the floor until the tiles blurred beneath her feet. That night, Daniel left for a poker night with his friends. He did not say goodbye. He slammed the door, and she listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Emily sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The flat was silent, except for the rain. The sound reminded her of another time, another place, sitting in her childhood bedroom in Brooklyn, watching raindrops trace patterns down the window pane. That version of her had been full of dreams. She had wanted to be a teacher. She had wanted to travel. She had wanted love that felt like safety, not surveillance. She rose from the table and walked into the bathroom. The mirror showed someone unfamiliar. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth was set in a line she could no longer smooth. She leaned in and whispered to herself, "You are still here." It was the first kind word she had spoken aloud in weeks. That weekend, Daniel insisted they visit his family in Long Island. The drive was long and tense. At dinner, he belittled her in front of his mother. She's always forgetting things these days. Like an old woman already. His mother laughed politely. Emily smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than showing the crack forming inside her. On the way home, the sky darkened early. Daniel was quiet until they hit traffic on the expressway. Then the shouting began. About the way she spoke, the way she looked, the way she had embarrassed him. When he pulled the car over suddenly onto the shoulder, Emily thought he might hit her. But he didn't. He just turned to her and said, "You ruin everything." She looked at him, then really looked, and all she saw was a man who needed to feel bigger than the people around him because he was terrified of being small. She turned to face the road and said nothing. That night, after he fell asleep, she did something she had not done in months. She opened her laptop and searched how to leave an abusive relationship. It was not a plan. Not yet. But it was the beginning. In the quiet hours before dawn, Emily lay awake, her laptop screen casting a faint glow across the bedroom. She had scrolled through forums, helplines, and survivor blogs, absorbing every word like medicine. For the first time in what felt like years, she realized she was not alone. One blog post stayed with her. It read, "Leaving is not the end. It is the beginning of finding yourself again." The next morning, Emily called in sick. She waited until Daniel left for work, then sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. Her hands shook, but she began to write. Copy passport and ID. Hide spare cash. Contact shelter hotline. Arrange safe address. Speak to HR at work. She knew the risks. She had read about women who tried and failed. But something inside her refused to die quietly. She deserved more than fear and control. That week, she began the slow work of reclaiming her life. She left small amounts of cash at her office, tucked behind unused binders. She backed up important documents on a hidden USB drive. She used a prepaid phone she bought from a newsagent 2 blocks away. Each step, though tiny, felt monumental. Then came the night he found her writing. She had been careless. A scrap of her list had fallen behind the radiator. Daniel had been vacuuming when he discovered it. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the crumpled paper. Emily froze. Her throat went dry. "It's nothing. Just notes from work." "Don't lie to me," he hissed. "Are you planning something?" Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "No, I swear. It's nothing." He stared at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he tore the paper in half, then quarters, then eighths, before letting it flutter to the floor like ashes. "Don't ever lie to me again," he said. She nodded, swallowing the scream that wanted to claw its way out. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow, but only for a moment. Then she pulled out her backup list, hidden in the pocket of an old coat. She rewrote it, clearer this time. She was done being afraid. 2 weeks later, her colleague Sarah approached her after a team meeting. Sarah had noticed the way Emily flinched when someone spoke too loudly. She had noticed the silence around her. "If you ever need someone to talk to," Sarah said gently, "I'm here." Emily looked at her, blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I might take you up on that." And she did. Sarah became a quiet but powerful force in Emily's life. They met in coffee shops, spoke in coded messages. Sarah helped her contact a local support organization that offered legal aid and temporary housing. Everything was almost ready. But Daniel began to change. He sensed something. He grew more suspicious, more possessive. He installed an app on her phone to track her location. He began arriving at her office unannounced. One night, he asked her outright, "Are you planning to leave me?" Emily paused. "No," she said softly. "I'm not." He nodded, satisfied. But in her mind, she was already gone. She just needed the right moment. And it was coming. Emily's heart thudded beneath her ribs like a ticking clock. Every day brought her closer to the moment she would leave, yet danger pressed in from all sides. Daniel's surveillance tightened. He controlled her social media, checked her phone logs, and even asked neighbors if they had seen anything unusual. Paranoia had transformed him into a shadow that trailed her everywhere. At work, she whispered to Sarah, "It has to be soon. I think he knows." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Friday. I'll drive you myself. After work." Emily nodded. It was the first time in months that hope sparked in her chest like a flame in the dark. That Friday morning, she packed a small bag, pretending it was for the gym. In it, she placed her essentials: ID, cash, charger, a change of clothes. Her hands trembled, but she zipped it shut and left it in her office locker. She wrote a short note and folded it twice. It simply read, "I'm sorry. I need to find myself again. Please do not follow me." At 4:30, she sent a text to Daniel, "Running late. Don't wait for me." Then, she and Sarah walked out of the office like it was any other Friday. But this time, Emily never looked back. They drove in silence through the crowded streets of Manhattan. Emily stared out the window at the blur of neon signs and office towers. She felt like a ghost drifting between two lives, one that had broken her and one she hadn't yet begun. They arrived at a quiet building near Harlem, owned by a nonprofit that housed women fleeing abuse. The front door buzzed them in. A woman named Deirdre met them at the front desk. She was warm, calm, and didn't ask too many questions. Sarah gave Emily a final hug, whispered, "You're brave," and left. For the first time in years, Emily sat on a bed she could call her own. It was small and plain, but it didn't matter. It wasn't his. That night, she slept for 10 hours straight. The next morning, her phone buzzed with missed calls and angry messages. Then silence. The silence scared her more. She went out only for necessities. Her world had become smaller, but safer. Every day, she met with a counselor. She learned phrases she had forgotten, like "I deserve peace," and "it wasn't my fault." A week later, she filed for a restraining order. Daniel didn't show up in court, but she knew it wasn't over. Abusers rarely let go easily. And indeed, he tried calling from different numbers. He emailed her. He even showed up at her workplace one afternoon, demanding to know where she was. Thankfully, she was no longer there. HR had protected her. They had flagged his presence and alerted authorities. The shelter moved her to a second, more private location. Emily now used a new name on official records and started job interviews under that identity. One night, she walked along the river, breathing in the crisp New York air. The city no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a maze she had survived. But just as she began to settle, something unexpected happened. She received a letter. It was handwritten. No return address. Inside, it simply read, You can run, but you'll never be free. Emily froze. Was it from him? How did he find her? Her safe world cracked just a little. She stared at the letter, hands shaking, unsure whether to burn it, hand it over, or run again. Because the truth was undeniable. Even when you escape the cage, the shadow sometimes follows.